What if your new home wasn't just haunted, but hungry? When Stephen and his wife move into a quiet house in a small town, they believe they're escaping the chaos of city life, but buried beneath the floorboards lies an ancient hunger, one bound to his bloodline, one that's waited for decades to claim him. As the rules unravel and the whispers grow louder, Stephen must confront a darkness his family tried to flee generations ago. This isn't just a haunting, it's a debt, and it's come due. The realtor's smile stretched too wide as she handed me the keys. "Just remember the rules," she said, her voice dropping slightly, as though sharing a private joke neither of us fully understood. I forced a chuckle, tucking the keys into my jacket pocket. Sure, the rules. The afternoon sun dipped low behind the endless line of pines as Molly and I stood on the porch of our new house. The colonial-style home towered over us, its white clapboard siding and tall, narrow windows reflecting the last light of day. For most people, this place might have been a dream. 2 acres of secluded land outside Elder Hollow, Vermont, far from the noise and mess of the city. For us, it was a fresh start, especially for Molly, especially for the baby. She ran her hand over her stomach, not quite showing yet, but protective all the same. "It's beautiful, Stephen," she whispered. I nodded, but something gnawed at me. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the realtor's odd warning, or maybe it was the faint, musty smell as we stepped inside. The air was cool, untouched for years, and every step we took across the old hardwood floors echoed too loudly. Molly drifted toward the living room, where large windows let in streams of golden light. A massive stone fireplace dominated the far wall. Above the mantel hung an antique mirror, its surface foggy and cracked. In the center of the room sat an old armchair, facing away from us as though someone had just been sitting there and stood up a moment before we entered. I frowned. Strange place to leave furniture. Did they mention anything about the previous owners leaving stuff behind? Molly shook her head. "No, but I kinda like it. Gives the place some character." I didn't answer. Instead, my eyes drifted toward the staircase. It was narrow, old, each wooden step slightly curved from decades of wear. My father's voice echoed in my mind like a ghost reaching through time. "Always count the steps, son. Always count them before you buy." And yet, I hadn't. Not during the walkthrough, not during inspection, not during any of the paperwork. The house was perfect, too perfect, and I'd gotten careless. "Stefan?" Molly's voice pulled me back. She smiled, a little concerned. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just thinking." Upstairs, the house seemed to hum with a quiet energy. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a narrow hallway that seemed longer than it should have been. The nursery sat at the end, already bathed in soft afternoon light. Molly ran her fingers across the windowsill. Dust puffed into the air. "We'll clean it up tomorrow," I said. "No lifting, though. Doctor's orders." She smiled again. "Yes, sir." As we made our way back downstairs, something cold brushed the back of my neck. I stopped halfway down, glancing over my shoulder. Molly was several steps below, her hand on the railing, looking up at me. "What's wrong?" she asked. I shook my head. Nothing. But something had touched me. I was sure of it. By evening, the movers had unloaded the last of our boxes. Molly busied herself unpacking in the kitchen while I tested the new security cameras I'd installed around the property. Working in tech had its perks. I wasn't about to live out here in the middle of nowhere without some extra eyes. As night fell, the house seemed to grow heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The air turned colder, though the heating worked fine. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, sending their shadows dancing across the windows. At around midnight, while Molly slept upstairs, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the old chair. It sat motionless, but something about it felt wrong. Like it didn't belong here. Like it had always been here. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera feed. Nothing, just an empty room. Still, I set the motion sensor to alert me if anything moved. The clock struck 3:33 a.m. My phone buzzed. Motion detected. Living room. My chest tightened. I opened the feed and froze. For a fraction of a second, the chair appeared to shift slightly, almost like someone unseen had sat down, adjusted their position, then nothing. Static filled the edges of the frame before the image cleared again, showing the chair sitting perfectly still. A chill rolled through me. I stared at the feed for several more minutes, but the room remained unchanged. Finally, I forced myself to set the phone down, telling myself it was just a glitch, old wiring, faulty sensor, maybe even a draft from one of the open vents. Still, sleep didn't come easy that night. The following morning, as dawn painted the sky pale blue, I stood again at the base of the staircase. This time, I counted. 1, 2, 3. My breath grew uneven as I ascended. 7, 8, 9. I swallowed. 10, 11. 11 steps. Exactly 11. My father's voice rang again inside my skull, sharper this time, almost angry. Never live in a house with 11 steps. I exhaled slowly, trying to suppress the anxiety swelling in my chest. It was a coincidence. Old superstitions. Silly stories from my childhood that I had long since buried. I was a man of logic now. Technology, security systems, cameras, facts. And yet, as I stood there, staring down at the 11th step beneath my feet, I could not shake the sensation that someone was standing directly behind me, breathing softly against the back of my neck. The rest of the morning passed with a gnawing sense of unease lodged deep in my chest. Molly, cheerful as always, floated from room to room, humming softly as she unpacked small kitchen appliances, folding dish towels into drawers, stacking our old coffee mugs into neat rows. She didn't seem to notice anything wrong. Maybe I was imagining it all. Maybe. By mid-afternoon, I decided to busy my hands. The last boxes sat near the front door, mostly filled with books and a few fragile items. As I reached down to grab one of the heavier boxes, I heard it again. Soft, deliberate footsteps from somewhere above. I froze. The sound wasn't Molly. She was still humming in the kitchen. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, pacing across the upstairs hallway, then descending the staircase one creaking step at a time. The rhythm was steady, unnatural, as if whoever it was already knew I was listening. "Molly?" I called, my voice cracking slightly. "Yeah, honey," she answered from the kitchen, completely unaware. The footsteps stopped. Silence swallowed the house again. My throat went dry. I didn't want to scare her, or myself, so I laughed weakly, as if trying to brush it off. "Nothing, just talking to myself." The house answered only with its usual creaks and sighs. Still, my pulse pounded against my temples as I lifted the box, making my way up the stairs with forced confidence. Each step groaned beneath my weight. I couldn't help but count them again as I ascended. 1, 2, 3. The numbers whispered like a quiet chant in my head. 10, 11. At the top, I placed the box down and looked around. Empty, no sign of anyone, of anything. I tried to shake it off, but something new caught my eye. A slight imperfection in the wall's paint halfway down the hallway, just across from the nursery. At first glance, it was nothing. Perhaps a crack in the drywall or an old patch job from years ago. But as I ran my fingers along the surface, I realized it wasn't just a crack. It was a seam. A hidden door. The seam was narrow, expertly concealed beneath layers of paint, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. My stomach turned. I pressed against it lightly. Nothing budged. Locked, or perhaps sealed. That same cold breath returned, like fingers brushing against the back of my neck. I shuddered and stepped away quickly. As night fell again, Molly retired early. The baby was already demanding rest from her, and I was glad she wasn't staying up. She needed the sleep. I sat downstairs once more, facing the old armchair like a silent adversary. The house seemed to settle into a deeper quiet than before, the kind that pressed against your eardrums until even your own heartbeat felt too loud. At exactly 3:33 a.m., my phone buzzed again, motion detected. Living room. I opened the live feed instantly. This time, it was clearer. In the dim glow of night vision, I saw the chair, no longer empty. A shadow sat there. The figure was blurry, like static, had formed the shape of a person hunched forward, hands clasped together, head low. Its outline flickered, glitching in and out of the camera's focus. I couldn't see a face, but somehow I knew it was staring directly into the camera. Directly at me. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure faded, dissolving back into empty air. The chair sat perfectly still, unoccupied once again. My skin prickled with cold sweat. I forced my breathing to steady. Maybe a reflection, maybe some kind of interference. I clung to those explanations like life rafts, but I didn't believe them. Unable to sleep, I spent the remainder of the night scrolling through old property records online. Elder Hollow was a small town. Its records didn't go far back, at least not in the public databases. But the house itself, this house, had been listed under multiple owners in the past 50 years. A surprising number of them had abandoned the property suddenly. Several others, well, there were no forwarding addresses. In the public forums, buried deep within strange paranormal message boards, there were rumors, stories of families who bought homes in Elder Hollow and vanished, talk of old town rituals, secret societies, and strange rules whispered at town gatherings. My father's voice haunted me, louder now. Always count the stairs. Always fill the chair. The rules. The rules. As dawn broke, I finally made one last decision. I had to know more. I couldn't keep speculating and letting my mind spiral further. There had to be someone local who knew what was going on. At breakfast, I carefully broached the topic with Molly. "Do you remember what the realtor said about the rules?" She looked up from her cereal, her face calm but curious. "Yeah, it was weird, but probably just some old town superstition, right? Small towns love that stuff." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe. But I want to check in at the library today, do a little research." She smiled. "I figured you would. That's my detective." I kissed her forehead, trying to hide my unease. "Don't overexert yourself, okay? Promise." The local library was quiet and smelled of old paper and lemon cleaner. Behind the front desk sat a frail elderly woman wearing thick bifocals, her silver hair tied back in a bun. "Good morning," I greeted politely. I was hoping to look at some property records for 129 Black Pine Road. Her eyes narrowed just slightly at the address. "That house again?" she muttered, almost too softly for me to hear. I straightened. "Excuse me?" She looked up at me, forced a thin smile, and spoke more clearly. "You'll want the archives section, in the basement. The older files aren't digitized." I thanked her and made my way downstairs, the wooden steps creaking beneath my weight. The air grew colder as I descended, thick with the smell of mildew and something metallic. The files were ancient, most handwritten, many water-stained or torn, but after an hour of digging, I found a file that made my blood freeze. A photo. Black and white. A group of men and women standing in front of what looked like my house, but younger, fresher. Standing at the front of the group was a man holding a large book. His face was familiar. My father. In his handwriting below the photo, Elder Order 1973. I dropped the file. My stomach churned. My father was one of them. I couldn't get the photo out of my head. My father stood there, younger than I had ever seen him, his face solemn beneath a strange wooden arch carved with symbols I didn't recognize. The others beside him wore expressions that hovered somewhere between pride and dread. And behind them, towering above the group, was my house. My house. The Elder Order, 1973. When I finally returned home from the library, Molly was curled up on the couch, a blanket draped over her legs. The old armchair still sat nearby, looming in its same fixed spot, as though it hadn't moved for decades, though I now questioned whether it had ever moved at all. She looked up from her book and smiled. "Find anything?" I hesitated. "Just old town history. Bunch of small town weirdness, you know how it is." I didn't want to worry her, yet. Not when I barely understood what I had found. Later that evening, as the house settled into another unsettling silence, I sat in my office, staring at the photograph again. My father never spoke of Elder Hollow, not really. I always thought we lived a simple, uneventful life, until the day he died, falling down the stairs of our childhood home. A fall he never should have made. I never thought to question the house before. Now, I wondered if I should have questioned everything. The creaking above my head interrupted my thoughts. Heavy footsteps, pacing across the hallway upstairs, directly above me. They moved steadily, methodically, like they were counting. One step, another. I stood from my chair, my heart pounding, but made no move toward the stairs. Instead, I grabbed my phone and opened the security feed. Static. The cameras glitched violently for several seconds before stabilizing again. When the feed finally cleared, I saw something that made my mouth run dry. On the top landing of the staircase stood a faint silhouette, no features, just a vague distortion in the air, as though someone invisible was occupying that space. The figure twitched slightly, as if aware I was watching, then it vanished. I closed the app and tried to steady my breath, but the room felt smaller somehow, like the walls were inching closer with each heartbeat. The next morning, Molly noticed my unease. "Stephen, you didn't sleep, did you?" I shook my head, trying to play it down. "I'm fine, just need some air." But I wasn't fine, and I wasn't sure if I could be again. By noon, I found myself driving back into town, not to the library this time, but to a small antique shop tucked between two decaying buildings. The store was cramped, filled with dusty shelves of forgotten things. At the far end, sitting behind a cluttered wooden desk, was Mildred Hawthorne. She was older than I expected, perhaps well into her 70s, but sharp. Her eyes followed me with a kind of quiet suspicion as I approached. "You're the one who bought the Callahan house," she said before I even spoke. I froze. "How did you?" "Everyone knows everything here," she interrupted softly, "especially when it comes to that house." I swallowed hard. "Then maybe you can help me understand it." She studied me for a moment, then gestured to a nearby chair. "Sit." The chair creaked under my weight. Mildred leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "You've seen it, haven't you? The shadows, the rules?" I nodded. "I don't know what any of it means." She exhaled, as if releasing years of burden. "They were called the Elder Order. Your father was one of them. So was mine." "Why? What were they doing?" "They believed the town was cursed," she explained. "Long before your house was even built, something ancient lived beneath these woods. The Order thought they could contain it. They devised rules to keep it asleep, superstitions passed off as harmless tradition. But they weren't harmless. They were binding." Her voice trembled slightly. 11 steps, I said quietly. She nodded. 11 children. That's what the ritual demanded. But they failed. Only 10 were taken. 1 escaped. I stared at her. My pulse thudded in my ears. 1 escaped? Her gaze deepened, locking onto mine. "You?" she whispered. The room spun for a moment. "No, that can't be. You were a child when the final ritual failed," she continued. "Your father took you and ran. That's why you don't remember?" I felt like vomiting. "The house has been waiting ever since," she said softly. "Waiting for the 11th. The wind howled outside, rattling the shop windows. My hands trembled on my lap. "And the chair?" I asked. "Place for it to rest." "When the chair is empty, it comes closer. Always fill the chair. The rules weren't meant to protect us, they were meant to bind it." Mildred reached into a drawer and handed me an old yellowed notebook. My father's handwriting filled the pages, lined with frantic notes, diagrams, symbols I didn't recognize. "I kept it," she said. "He wanted you to have it. If you ever returned." I flipped through the pages, feeling sicker with every sketch, every line scrawled in desperate ink. "Is there any way to stop it?" I whispered. Her eyes darkened. You can only delay it. The drive home was slower than usual. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they should have. The Vermont pines blurred past my windows, towering sentinels like silent judges watching me carry the weight of a truth I didn't ask for. 11 children, 1 survivor. Me. The notebook lay heavy on the passenger seat, almost pulsing with some invisible weight, as if the ink itself bled with the sickness of what it contained. My father's frantic handwriting, sketches of ritual circles, notes on the rules, always the rules, scrawled and circled with increasing desperation. Never leave the chair empty, always count the stairs. Never open the hatch. Never speak its name after dark. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sky had dimmed into that pale, cold shade of evening where the world looks drained of color. The house stood as it always did, still, silent, patient. Molly greeted me at the door. She tried to smile, but her eyes held that quiet concern she always had when she knew something was wrong. She knew better than to push, though. "You were gone a while," she said softly. "Yeah, got caught up reading," I answered, forcing a weak grin. I wasn't ready to tell her everything. Not yet. Not while it still felt like a nightmare I was desperately trying to wake up from. That night, after dinner, I installed 2 more cameras. One at the top of the staircase, directly facing the landing, and another pointed straight at the armchair. I needed to know if it would return, if any of it was real. My rational mind still clung to the hope that somehow this was all a breakdown in wiring, a coincidence, a malfunction. Molly watched me work from the kitchen. "Babe, is this about the footsteps you heard?" I paused. She was perceptive, always was. "I just want to be cautious," I said, avoiding her gaze. "We're out here alone. I need to know we're safe." She nodded, but didn't press further. Around 10 p.m., she went upstairs to rest. I remained in the living room, my laptop open, watching the camera feeds. The armchair sat still in its place, perfectly centered under the dim light of the old chandelier. I stared at it, half expecting it to shift, to breathe. By midnight, the house had fully settled into its unsettling quiet. The walls creaked, the pipes groaned, the wind clawed gently at the windows, but it was that deeper silence underneath it all that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The absence of natural sound, like the house itself was holding its breath. I don't remember falling asleep. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the motion alert chimed. My eyes shot open. My laptop screen flickered. The armchair feed glitched for a few seconds. Then the shape appeared. This time the figure was clearer than ever before. Its form was hunched as if weighed down by something unseen, shoulders narrow and sharp, a head too long, tilting slightly, like it listened for something I couldn't hear. I could see the faint impression of fingers draped along the armrests. Long, thin, almost insect-like. The static cleared just enough for me to catch a glimpse of its face. Or rather, the absence of one. A smooth void where features should have been, like black glass reflecting nothing but emptiness. And then it twitched. The figure slowly turned its faceless head toward the camera, toward me. The feed cut to static. I shot up from the couch, breathing hard, heart pounding. My legs carried me up the stairs before I even had time to think. I needed to check on Molly. I needed to know she was okay. The staircase groaned beneath my steps as I counted them instinctively. 1, 2, 3. The chant in my head grew louder. 10, 11. At the top, I hesitated, listening. The hallway was dark except for a sliver of moonlight leaking through the nursery window. All the doors were closed, all except one. Our bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently. Molly lay asleep, peaceful, untouched. But my relief was short-lived when I noticed something else. The armchair, the old armchair, the one that had been downstairs for as long as we'd lived here, was now sitting in the corner of our bedroom. Its fabric looked darker under the moonlight, like it had soaked up something vile. My mouth went dry. My stomach turned. I glanced back down the hall. No sounds, no movement. I approached the chair slowly, each step heavier than the last. My hands trembled as I reached out, unsure of what I even intended to do. Touch it? Check if it was real? Burn it? As my fingers hovered inches from the faded fabric, I heard it. A whisper, barely audible but clear enough to paralyze me. Sit. The voice was wrong. Too many layers, like several voices overlapping, out of sync, speaking from a place I couldn't locate. I yanked my hand back as my breath caught in my throat. My chest ached as my heart raced. Molly stirred in her sleep, her head shifting slightly on the pillow. I backed away from the chair, shutting the door behind me as quietly as I could. The rules. The goddamn rules. Back downstairs, I paced the living room for what felt like hours, unable to sit, unable to stand still, afraid to blink. I scoured my father's notebook again, searching for something, anything that could tell me how to stop this before it went any further. But the more I read, the worse it got. When the chair moves on its own, it no longer waits for you. It feeds. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The morning sunlight felt hollow, as if the warmth couldn't quite break through the weight pressing down inside the house. Molly was already downstairs, sipping tea at the kitchen table, oblivious to what had occurred overnight. The chair sat back in its usual place in the living room, as if it had never moved at all, as if I had imagined everything. I hadn't. Her eyes studied me as I sat across from her. "You didn't sleep again." I forced a smile. Just too much on my mind. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. "Stephen, we've been here less than a month and you've barely settled in. Maybe this was a bad idea. Maybe we rushed it." I shook my head. "No. The house is fine." The lie slid off my tongue like oil. But if I told her the truth, the real truth, I wasn't sure she'd stay. And something deep inside me feared that her leaving wouldn't be enough to save her. Later that afternoon, while Molly napped upstairs, I returned to the hallway outside the nursery, to the seam in the wall I had discovered days ago. The hidden door. My pulse quickened as I ran my fingers along the faint outline once again. This time, I was ready. I brought tools. A small crowbar, a flashlight, and my father's notebook, which seemed to grow heavier each day. His scribbled notes circled back to this place repeatedly. Never open the hatch. But it was too late for rules now. The rules had never been about protection. They were about containment. With a careful wedge of the crowbar, the panel popped loose with a soft groan. Dust billowed out as the door creaked open, revealing a narrow hidden staircase descending into darkness. Cold air rushed out like a breath exhaled from the house's deepest lungs. The walls inside were old, damp, lined with crumbling brick that hadn't seen daylight in decades. My flashlight beam trembled as I stepped forward, the weak light slicing through layers of dust particles swirling in the air like tiny ghosts. The stairs went deeper than I expected. When my foot finally touched solid ground, I found myself standing in a small chamber, maybe 10 feet wide, low-ceilinged, with walls covered in carvings. Symbols I recognized from my father's notebook were etched into the stone, overlapping one another like layers of desperate prayers. At the center of the room sat something I was not prepared for. A circle of 11 small wooden stools, each weathered by time. On 10 of them sat crude straw dolls, each one dressed in tiny fabric scraps, their faces marked with symbols scrawled in what looked like dried blood. But the 11th stool was empty, waiting. My stomach lurched. I stepped closer, my breath shallow, and spotted something else tucked beneath the empty stool. An old tape recorder, my father's handwriting again, etched into its cracked plastic casing. Confession. With trembling hands, I pressed play. The tape whirred to life, the recording faint and distorted by time. "This is Robert Callahan," my father's voice crackled through the speaker. "If you're hearing this, then I've failed. We all have." There was a long pause, broken only by his labored breathing. "The Order thought we could contain it. 11 children, 11 sacrifices. The binding required their innocence. But I couldn't give him my son, not my Stephen. His voice broke then, raw and full of grief. I took him. I ran. I thought I could escape, that the rules would hold without him. But it's been hunting ever since, feeding where it can, lurking. The tape hissed for several seconds before his voice returned, weaker this time. If you find this, Stephen, know that you were meant to die here. You were the 11th. The recorder clicked off. I staggered backward, slamming into the stone wall behind me. My chest heaved as my father's words echoed inside my skull. You were the 11th. The ground beneath my feet felt unstable, as though the very foundation of the house shifted with the weight of the revelation. This wasn't a home. It was a vessel, a cage, and I was its unfinished offering. Suddenly, I heard a faint scratching sound behind me. I spun, flashlight beam darting wildly across the stone walls, landing finally on a small wooden hatch built into the far corner. Its surface bulged outward slightly, as if something pushed from the other side. The scratching grew louder. Panic surged through me. My instincts screamed to run, to slam the hidden door shut and pretend none of this existed. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I took a step closer, my breath frosting in the cold air. Then I heard it. A whisper, soft, childlike, but layered beneath it was something ancient, something wrong. Stephen. The hatch rattled violently. I stumbled backward, flashlight slipping from my grip and clattering to the ground, its beam spinning wildly across the dolls seated in the circle. For a brief moment, I could swear the straw figures twitched, subtle, almost imperceptible, as though they breathed. The air grew thicker, pressing against my chest, squeezing my lungs. I bolted up the narrow stairs, my legs barely keeping pace with my terror. The darkness seemed to follow me, nipping at my heels, pulling invisible fingers through my hair as I scrambled upward. Bursting through the hidden door, I slammed it shut and pressed my back against the wall, chest heaving. The house had never felt smaller. The walls seemed closer, the shadows longer, and somewhere, deep beneath my feet, the scratching continued, waiting. When I finally stumbled out of that hidden stairwell, the house didn't feel like my house anymore. The air was heavier, colder, like something unseen had finally been allowed to breathe alongside me, or inside me. I sat in the kitchen for what felt like hours, staring at the cracks in the tile, hearing nothing but the ticking of the wall clock. The usual sounds of the house, the creaky wood, the shifting pipes, had fallen silent, as if the entire structure held its breath, watching me process what I had uncovered. You were the 11th. I kept hearing his voice, my father, over and over again, breaking apart in that confession. All the pieces of my life I thought I understood rearranged themselves into something hideous. I was never meant to grow up. I was never supposed to live beyond that ritual. My stomach twisted as bile climbed my throat. Eventually, I dragged myself upstairs to check on Molly. She was fast asleep, the soft rise and fall of her chest the only thing that kept me tethered to reality. For a moment, I just stood there in the doorway, watching her, my mind spinning with the knowledge that everything about this house, about my life, was never meant to exist. A soft knock echoed behind me. 3 knocks. Deliberate. Wooden. I turned sharply, scanning the hallway. No one there. Just the moonlight slicing across the hardwood floor. Another knock, louder this time, came from downstairs. I gripped the banister as I made my way down, my feet heavy with dread. The knocks continued, steady as a metronome, now coming from the front door. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I hesitated. Something about the knocks felt wrong. Not human. Too rhythmic. Too patient. I peered through the peephole. There was no one on the porch. But that wasn't the worst part. In the reflection of the glass, just behind my own face, I saw it. Standing in the living room, next to the armchair, was a dark figure. No features, no face. Just a tall, long-limbed silhouette pulsing faintly, as though not entirely solid. I spun around, but the room was empty. The chair sat where it always did, waiting. The house was playing with me now. It wasn't trying to hide anymore. I couldn't stay here, not tonight. Rushing upstairs, I woke Molly gently. "Come on, sweetheart, get dressed." She blinked, groggy. "Stephen? What's going on? We need to go, right now." Her eyes filled with confusion and a rising fear. "Is it someone outside? Is it a break-in?" I shook my head. "No, worse, just trust me, please." She didn't argue further. I helped her up, guiding her gently through the house, down the stairs, my heart pounding harder with every step. And then we passed the armchair. It wasn't empty anymore. Molly let out a small gasp as her eyes locked onto the faint outline of the thing seated there. Even without features, we could feel its stare. Neither of us spoke. We moved past it carefully, like children sneaking past a sleeping predator. I reached for the front door, but it wouldn't open. The lock was unlatched. The handle turned freely, but the door wouldn't budge, as if some invisible pressure pushed against it from the outside. "Stephen," Molly whispered. The walls groaned, the lights flickered. The chair creaked as the figure inside began to rise. Without thinking, I grabbed Molly's hand and rushed toward the back door. It too refused to open, as though the house itself refused to release us. The windows slammed shut on their own, one by one. The air thickened, humming with a low, vibrating noise that settled into our bones. From somewhere behind us, I heard the scraping of long nails against the wooden floor. I turned just enough to see it, the figure now fully standing, impossibly tall, its head tilting to one side as it stepped forward. The distortion around its body warped the air like heat waves, though the room was bitterly cold. Then came the voices. Not one voice. Many. Whispers overlapped, chanting in an ancient tongue, merging with the cries of children, with wails and fragmented prayers. The cacophony filled my skull, nearly buckling my knees. Molly screamed, clutching her stomach. She dropped to her knees, sobbing in panic. "Stephen, it's pulling me." I grabbed her shoulders, desperate to hold her upright. "Fight it. Stay with me." But her eyes widened, glassy and vacant for a moment, like something was trying to reach through her, or from inside her. Then, as suddenly as it all began, everything stopped. The lights stabilized, the air lightened. The house fell deathly silent. The figure was gone. Molly collapsed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I held her tightly, whispering empty reassurances I didn't believe myself. When she finally calmed enough to speak, she looked up at me, trembling. "I heard them, Stefan. In my head. They were calling your name." I swallowed hard, pressing my forehead to hers. "It's trying to finish what it started." I helped her upstairs and into bed, though neither of us expected sleep. My mind raced, trying to piece together what little remained of my father's notes. There had to be more that he had hidden. As Molly lay shivering under the blankets, I dug through the old boxes in my office, pulling out every document, every photo, every scrap of my family's past I could find. And that's when I saw it. Behind an old family portrait was a folded, hand-drawn map of the house, but different. There were markings I hadn't seen before. A room that didn't appear on any blueprint. Hatch below. Never open. The words sent fresh chills through my spine. I hadn't found everything yet, and whatever waited beneath us, it wasn't done. The following morning broke through the windows like it had no idea what had happened the night before. The sun painted everything in warm gold, as though trying to convince us that the house was just a house, that nothing waited beneath the floorboards, that no whispers had slithered into Molly's mind. But I knew better, and Molly did too. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped tightly around a mug of untouched tea. Her face was pale, eyes swollen from a night of silent crying. She hadn't spoken much since we crawled into bed, only shaking her head whenever I tried to say anything. There was nothing to say. We both had heard it, we both had seen it, and we both knew it wasn't done. I sat across from her, the map spread out between us on the table. My fingers traced the faint pencil lines, following the outline of the house, past the nursery, past the hidden stairwell I had already breached, to a small mark further below. The hatch. Molly finally broke the silence. You said your father made this? I nodded, or at least he drew it. I don't know when. Her voice was quiet, shaky. What's down there, Stephen? I looked at her. Truly looked. She deserved honesty now, even if it shattered whatever fragile safety she still clung to. My father called it the order. They thought they could control something, bind it, but they failed. My throat tightened, and I was supposed to be the last offering. Her lip quivered, tears pooling again. You were a child. I swallowed the lump in my throat. He saved me, but it never stopped hunting. The rules, Molly, they were never meant to keep us safe. They were meant to keep it contained. She closed her eyes, two thin tears sliding down her cheeks. And now it wants you back. I reached across the table, gripping her hand. It won't take you, or the baby, I swear. But I didn't tell her the part I feared the most. That my presence alone may have doomed us all. That afternoon, I drove into town. Elder Hollow had always felt small, but now it felt like a suffocating maze. Every street familiar yet wrong. Every smiling face hiding the same secret that had buried itself in my bloodline. I found Mildred waiting at her antique shop like she had known I would come. You opened the stairwell, she said before I even stepped inside. I nodded. I found the dolls, the recorder. She studied me with that same sharp, penetrating gaze. And now you understand. Not enough, I admitted. There's a hatch beneath it. My father marked it. Mildred's face darkened. The final chamber. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. What's inside? She didn't answer right away. Her fingers tapped nervously on the counter. The Order built this house over the breach, she finally whispered. Long before your father's time. They thought physical boundaries, rituals, rules, could suppress it. But it's older than this land, older than us. I felt the weight pressing behind my eyes again. What is it? She swallowed hard. It was never named, not allowed. It doesn't belong here. It feeds on bloodlines, on families tied to the ritual. You were supposed to complete the circle. My skin crawled. That's why the chair moved into the bedroom. Why it's stronger now. It's breaking loose. Her voice dropped even lower. And it's using Molly to do it. The rage inside me flared. How? The child growing inside her is part of you, Stephen. Part of the broken ritual. If it takes her, it takes both of you. The walls seemed to shrink around me. There has to be a way to stop this, I hissed. Mildred's expression softened with a pity I hadn't seen before. There's only ever been delay. Your father delayed it for decades by stealing you away, but the debt was never paid. I shook my head, refusing to accept that answer. There's something else, some part of the ritual that was unfinished. That's why it's still hunting. Mildred hesitated, then reached under the counter, pulling out a dusty leather-bound book, older than anything else in her shop. This belonged to the first generation of the Order, she whispered. My grandfather was part of it. He recorded everything. The pages were filled with symbols, blood markings, names of the sacrificed. 11 names. Only 10 were crossed out. At the bottom, scribbled in an unsteady hand, was my name, Stephen Callahan. Awaiting. The air in the shop grew heavy, like the house had extended its reach into this very room. You're the last key, Mildred said softly. The hatch was never meant to stay shut forever. It only needed to wait for you to come home. I closed the book and looked up at her, my jaws set. Then I'll open it. Her eyes widened. No. I won't let it take Molly, I said firmly. If I'm the key, then I'm going to end it. Mildred's voice cracked. It's not that simple. You don't understand what you'll awaken. I don't care. I turned and left before she could stop me, gripping the old map tightly in my hand. That night, back at the house, the scratching beneath the floor had grown louder, more urgent, as though it knew, waiting. The night fell harder than usual. It wasn't just the weight of what I had learned. It was the house itself. Every board, every wall seemed to lean inward, like the structure had grown impatient, like it wanted me to act. The scratching beneath the floor was louder now, more deliberate, like fingernails clawing at old wood, trying to break through. Molly sat in the living room, her hands trembling as she stroked the curve of her belly. The lights flickered softly, shadows crawling unnaturally along the walls. She hadn't said much since I came back from town, but she could sense it too. The thing below us wasn't hiding anymore. I sat across from her, the old map unfolded on the coffee table between us. Its edges were frayed, the paper yellowed, but the hatch was clearly marked, sitting just beneath the chamber I'd already discovered. "It's getting closer, Stephen." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I can feel it, like something's pulling at me." I reached out and took her hand. Her skin was clammy, ice cold. "I won't let it take you, I swear." Her lip quivered. "What if it's already inside me?" I shook my head, my throat tightening. Don't say that." I could see the fear in her eyes. Raw, animalistic. She wasn't just afraid for herself, she was afraid for what might already be growing inside her. That whatever waited below might have already reached through her dreams, planting its roots deep inside our child. The clock struck midnight. The armchair groaned. We both froze. The chair didn't move. Not yet, but we could hear it breathing again, that low, wet sound, like lungs struggling to pull air through something that shouldn't breathe. "I can't stay here anymore, Stephen," Molly whispered, her voice breaking. "We have to leave." I wanted to agree. God, I wanted to. But leaving wouldn't stop this. We both knew that now. My father had tried. The order had tried. And still it waited. If I ran again, it would only follow. It would follow our child. And this time, there would be no place left to hide. "I need to go down there," I said finally. Her eyes widened in horror. "No, I have to," my voice cracked. "It wants me, not you." She shook her head violently, gripping my hand harder. "It wants all of us. It won't let you walk away." I leaned closer, forcing the words through my tightening throat. "If I don't face it, it's only going to get stronger. This house isn't a home, Molly. It's a mouth, and it's been starving for 40 years. The lights dimmed again. The scratching beneath the floor grew frantic, almost desperate. Molly's breathing grew shallow. She clutched her stomach again, wincing in pain. "Stephen, something's moving." I placed my hand on her belly. I could feel it too, not a normal kick, something else. A pulse, like a second heartbeat, too fast, too irregular. It was wrong. The house groaned as if it were flexing its very bones. "I need to end this," I whispered. Her eyes glistened with fresh tears. "Then we go together." I shook my head, standing. "No, you stay here. Whatever happens, you stay upstairs. Don't come down." The words hurt coming out, but I knew I had no other choice. I retrieved the crowbar and flashlight. My father's notebook was already tucked under my arm, along with the old ritual book Mildred had given me. My hands trembled as I approached the wall leading to the hidden stairwell. The air grew colder with each step. The house seemed to vibrate around me now, humming with a low, guttural tone that rattled my teeth. It was awake. Fully awake. I pried open the hidden door once more. The heavy scent of mildew and rot hit me instantly, thicker than before. The deeper I descended, the stronger the pressure grew, like something was pushing against me from every direction. When I reached the bottom of the hidden stairs, the chamber of straw dolls sat exactly as I had left it. 10 dolls seated in a perfect circle. 10 sacrifices. 1 missing. The empty stool stared back at me, waiting. The scratching was coming from the far wall now, where the small hatch stood, bulging slightly outward, as if the thing behind it had grown larger, more impatient. I stepped forward. The air buzzed, a low, static humming in my ears, drowning out my thoughts. I could hear them again. The whispers. "Stephen, Stephen." They overlapped, Dozens of voices tangled together, some familiar, some impossible. I dropped to my knees, gripping my head as the whispers grew louder, sinking into my mind like knives twisting into flesh. Come home, Stephen. Complete what was promised. The hatch vibrated violently, wood creaking under immense pressure. I forced myself back onto my feet, staggering toward the hatch. My fingers hovered over the latch, slick with sweat. My father's voice echoed faintly in my mind. Never open the hatch. I hesitated, my breath shaking, but the rules were never meant to protect me. They were meant to protect it. I had already broken the rules, and it was already here. With a sharp breath, I gripped the latch and pulled. The hatch creaked open. Cold black air exhaled from the darkness beyond, stinging my face like dry ice. I staggered backward as the void seemed to pulse before me, not just empty, but alive. Within that suffocating blackness, I saw shapes twisting, not bodies, but outlines of the others. The children. Limbs bending wrong. Faces frozen mid-scream. Their mouths stretched wide as though caught in the moment of being swallowed. The void pulsed again, sending a gust of rotten air across the chamber, and then it spoke. Not in words, but inside my mind, a pressure, a demand. The 11th. My knees buckled. I was no longer standing in a hidden chamber. I was standing inside its throat, and it was still hungry. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen at the mouth of that thing. The air inside the hatch wasn't simply cold. It was absent of anything human. No sound, no breath, not even space. Like standing on the edge of existence itself, staring into a cavity that didn't belong to this world. The shapes writhed inside it. Not alive, not dead, suspended like puppets without strings. Their faces twisted into permanent expressions of terror, eyes wide and empty. I couldn't tell if they were screaming or if my mind was making them scream. The void pulsed again. The 11th. My name wasn't spoken aloud, but the thing knew it. It always had. A sudden gust blasted from the opening, slamming into my chest and knocking me backward onto the damp stone floor. The hatch rattled but stayed open, and the shadows inside pulsed like a heartbeat. Slow, rhythmic, patient. As I scrambled back onto my feet, the whispers shifted. They weren't alone anymore. I heard Molly. Her voice floated through the darkness, layered and warped, but undeniably hers. Stefan. It wasn't her, of course, I knew that, but my heart still clenched at the sound. It was trying to draw me in, to pull me closer, using her voice as bait. I backed away, gripping my flashlight tight, the beam cutting through the swirling dust like a sword barely holding back a tide. Come closer? It's time. The voices twisted around me, crawling into my ears, into my head, wrapping themselves around my thoughts like vines. I stumbled back toward the stairs, pulling myself upward with weak, shaking arms, desperate to escape its pull. As I reached the top of the hidden stairwell, I slammed the door shut behind me and collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. The house was different now. The air was vibrating, the walls flexed, the ceiling creaked as if the beams were breathing. The house wasn't just a vessel anymore, it was fully awake. The thin boundary that once separated its hunger from the surface world was collapsing, and Molly was upstairs. I rushed toward the staircase, calling her name. Molly! There was no answer. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my legs screaming with every leap. The temperature dropped sharply as I reached the landing, my breath fogging in the air. The nursery door stood open. Inside, Molly stood completely still, facing the crib we hadn't even assembled yet. Her hands hung limply at her sides. Her head twitched slightly, as though struggling against an unseen weight. Molly! I shouted, stepping into the room. She didn't turn, but she spoke. It's inside me, she whispered. I can feel it. Her voice was not her own. It layered with something deeper, something wrong. I crossed the room carefully, heart pounding, not knowing whether she was still fully herself. The shadows in the nursery walls pulsed in time with her breath. Molly, listen to me. Fight it! Tears rolled down her face as her lips trembled. "It's calling for you, Stephen. It wants you to finish it." Her body jerked violently, like invisible strings yanking her spine upright. I grabbed her shoulders and shook her gently. "You're stronger than this. Stay with me." The room around us trembled. The crib rattled violently as the light bulb overhead exploded, sending glass raining down like shards of frozen rain. And then it spoke again, not through the void, but through her. "Complete the circle." Molly's mouth hung open as the voice hissed out of her throat, her eyes rolling upward into pure white. I held her tighter, screaming now, "You're not taking her." The thing pushed back, stronger than before. Her body convulsed in my arms, her breath growing shallow. In desperation, I reached into my pocket, pulling out my father's old pendant, a crude iron charm he'd always worn. The last relic of the order. I didn't know if it had any real power. I didn't know if anything did. But I pressed it against Molly's chest and shouted through clenched teeth, "Let her go!" Her body stiffened. The shadows recoiled. For a moment, just a moment, she collapsed into my arms, her eyes returning, filled with tears. I'm here," she sobbed. The room steadied. The humming dulled. The house paused. But only for a moment. The floorboards beneath our feet groaned, bending unnaturally. The wood warped and twisted, forming faint circular patterns, symbols from my father's book, from the Order's old rituals. The house was preparing itself. The hatch had opened. The breach was no longer contained. Molly clutched my shirt, her breath ragged. "It's still coming." I knew she was right. The chair downstairs groaned again, this time louder, heavier. It was no longer waiting, and neither could I. The house groaned beneath our feet like it was struggling to contain the thing inside its bones. Molly gripped my arm tighter, her nails digging into my skin as the vibrations pulsed stronger beneath us. The circular patterns continued to twist across the floor, glowing faintly with a sickly amber hue, like veins feeding something ancient and starved. "It's breaking through," she whispered, breathless. "Stefan, it's here." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat was dry. I could feel it too. That invisible gravity pulling at my chest. That sickening presence pressing against my skull like cold fingers wrapping around my mind. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere left to go. The armchair downstairs groaned again, but this time it didn't stop. The sound of wood bending and splitting echoed up through the entire house, like bones snapping in a body far too large for this place. I grabbed Molly's hand. "We have to move." We stumbled out of the nursery, down the hallway that now felt twice as long, the shadows twisting unnaturally in the corners of my vision. The air grew colder with every step toward the staircase, the very walls of the house flexing inward as though breathing around us. And then I saw it. At the bottom of the stairs. The thing. No longer just a silhouette or a flicker on the camera feed, but fully formed now. It stood over 8 feet tall, its elongated limbs bending slightly backward at the joints, head tilted unnaturally to one side like a broken marionette. Its surface wasn't skin. It shimmered like black glass, absorbing the dim light rather than reflecting it. But its face, or lack of one, was worse. A smooth, featureless void, like someone had erased its identity entirely. Only 2 faint impressions where eyes might have been. They weren't eyes, they were holes. Endless. As we reached the top of the stairs, its head snapped upward toward us, and though it had no mouth, I heard it speak again, not aloud, but inside my mind. "Complete the circle." Molly gasped beside me, clutching her stomach. "Stephen, it's pulling again." Her body lurched forward as though something inside was yanking her downward toward it. She staggered dangerously close to the stairwell edge. I pulled her back, wrapping my arms around her tightly. "No, you don't get to take her," I shouted, my voice cracking. The creature's body convulsed, jerking violently like a puppet on tangled strings. The house trembled along with it. "You were promised." I could feel its fury now, its hunger turning desperate. From deep within the floorboards, a new sound began. Children's voices, a chorus, dozens of small voices humming a twisted lullaby. out of tune and hauntingly slow. The air filled with their chorus as the house pulsed around us like a breathing organ. Molly sobbed against my chest. "Stefan, it's not going to stop." I tightened my grip around her and made my decision. We're not waiting for it anymore. I pulled her with me toward the far end of the hall, toward my office where the hidden stairwell waited. Every step was harder now, as though we were fighting against a current dragging us backward into some invisible abyss. The creature took a step forward at the base of the stairs, its movements unnatural, spasming in short jerks, its elongated arms swaying like pendulums. Its head twitched with each step, following us. I threw open the hidden panel with trembling hands. The darkness below was somehow even heavier than before. The scratching returned again, louder, but now I understood. The scratching wasn't coming from something trapped trying to get out. It was coming from the thing inside, trying to pull everything else in. We descended the narrow stairwell, step by step, as the house continued to hum with unnatural life. The stone chamber awaited us, the 10 straw dolls still seated, the empty stool at the center glaring like an open wound. Molly stumbled slightly on the final step, and I caught her before she fell. I can't keep fighting it," she whispered. "It's inside my head." I squeezed her shoulder. "You're stronger than it." The hatch across the room stood open now. The void inside pulsed slowly. The voices of the lost children grew louder, circling in the chamber like a chorus of trapped soul. And then it emerged. A second shape, larger, more monstrous, began to seep from the hatch itself. The creature at the top of the stairs was only one part. This was the core, the origin. It oozed from the blackness like thick rolling smoke made solid, twisting into vague impressions of faces, mouths gasping soundlessly. Dozens of them merged into one grotesque form, reaching out tendrils toward us. Molly collapsed to her knees, shaking violently. I stood between her and the thing, pulling my father's notebook from under my jacket with one hand, while gripping the iron pendant with the other. My father had written over and over in desperate scrawls, "You cannot destroy it, but you can starve it." I flipped to the ritual pages, reading words written by terrified hands long before mine. The creature hissed in my head again, trying to drown out the words. "Enough. Submit." But I spoke anyway, my voice cracking but defiant, reciting the incantation as best as I could through the pressure in my skull. The symbols carved into the walls began to glow faintly as I spoke, reacting to the words passed down by the order. The tendrils snapped and recoiled. The void pulsed angrily. Behind me, Molly gasped, clutching her belly again. "Stephen, it's weakening!" The voices in the chamber screamed as one. The children, the thing, the house itself. The symbols glowed brighter, vibrating now, the air growing impossibly heavy as the void convulsed. "You cannot sever blood." I shouted louder, drowning its words, pushing every ounce of strength I had into the final line. The void collapsed inward, pulling the tendrils back like snapping cables. The chamber groaned. The ground beneath us shook violently as a deafening howl filled the air, and then silence. The house exhaled one final low groan. The void was sealed again, at least for now. For a moment, the world held its breath. The chamber stopped trembling. The tendrils dissolved into black mist, sucked back into the narrow slit of the hatch like reverse smoke. The pulsing light from the carvings dimmed until only the faintest glow remained under the damp stone walls. The oppressive weight in the air eased slightly, as though the thing, whatever name it truly held, had been forced once again into its unnatural sleep. But the house was not silent. Far above us, the bones of the structure still creaked and shifted, like something continued pacing through the halls, restless. The chair groaned again, upstairs, its wooden frame popping as though it missed the weight that had briefly sat there. I knelt beside Molly. Her breath was rapid but steadying, color slowly returning to her face. "It's over," I whispered, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Molly's lips trembled. "It's not over." She looked up at me, her voice cracked and small. "It's waiting for the next time." I didn't argue. We both knew she was right. The thing hadn't been destroyed, only pushed back. Again. The weight of my father's final words rang inside me. You can only delay it. I helped Molly to her feet, and together we ascended the narrow stairwell, each step groaning beneath our combined weight. The hidden door closed behind us with a hollow thud, its presence now somehow heavier, like the house resented us for what we had done. The air on the main floor was no longer buzzing, but it was still cold. Emptied of warmth, but filled with something else, the quiet acknowledgement of unfinished business. The armchair sat motionless where it had always been. Its frame no longer groaned. It simply waited. We didn't speak as we crossed the living room. Words felt fragile now. The house itself seemed smaller, but not because it had shrunk, because we had finally seen how vast its hunger really was. When morning came, I packed what little we could. Molly sat silently near the front window, staring out at the dense line of trees that had once seemed so picturesque. Now, they felt like silent witnesses to every horror we had uncovered. You still want to leave? I asked gently. She turned toward me, her eyes empty and exhausted. I don't know where we could go where it wouldn't follow. I nodded. That same thought had haunted me too. It's not bound to this house, Molly, I said quietly. It's bound to me, to the blood. Her hands gently rested on her stomach, and to the baby. The unspoken truth neither of us wanted to say aloud hung between us. My blood had kept it hungry for decades. Now a new generation was growing inside her. I didn't know whether that made the child more vulnerable or more dangerous. I loaded the last of the boxes into the car while Molly stood behind me on the porch, clutching the small iron pendant my father had left behind. I had given it to her before we left, even if neither of us knew whether it offered any real protection. At this point, we clung to any thread of hope we could find. As I closed the trunk, I looked back at the house one final time. Its windows stared blankly back at me like hollow eyes, no movement behind the glass, no sounds, but I could feel it, waiting, watching, breathing. I slid into the driver's seat beside Molly and turned the ignition. The engine rumbled softly beneath us, steady and familiar, one of the few things that still felt real. We pulled away slowly, the tires crunching over gravel as we rolled down the long driveway beneath the towering pines. In the rearview mirror, I caught one last glimpse of the house standing in the clearing. I swore, for just a moment. The armchair had shifted. It was no longer facing inward. It now faced the door, as if waiting for whoever would come next. The road curved ahead of us and the house disappeared from view, swallowed by the dense trees behind us. We didn't speak for miles. The further we drove, the thinner the air felt around us, as though distance weakened its grip. But the relief was hollow. I knew better now. The thing didn't need the house. The house was only one door. There were others, and my family's debt was still unpaid. As the sun dipped lower into the horizon, painting the sky with muted orange streaks, I glanced sideways at Molly. Her eyes were closed, but her hand rested protectively over her stomach. She wasn't sleeping. Neither of us really could anymore. You should know something, I whispered, my voice breaking through the quiet hum of the tires on pavement. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting mine. If something happens again, if it starts pulling at you, I swallowed hard. Don't fight it alone. Tell me, no matter what it says. She nodded slowly, tears forming. I'm scared, Stephen. I know. My throat tightened. So am I. The road ahead stretched endless and empty. And somewhere beneath it all, in places we couldn't see, it waited. Sleeping, but not dead. Starved, but not gone. Not yet. It's been 6 months since we left Elder Hollow. 6 months of restless nights, of Molly waking up drenched in sweat, her eyes wide and glassy as she clutches her stomach. 6 months of hearing distant echoes in my own head, whispers that never fully vanish, but linger at the edge of my thoughts. I still hear the chair creak sometimes, even here hundreds of miles away in this rented apartment, surrounded by busy streets and the noise of city life. The house follows in pieces, not in physical form, but as something stitched into the fabric of us, of me. Molly's pregnancy has been difficult. The doctors can't explain the irregularities, the faint, secondary pulses they hear when they check the heartbeat, the shifting shadows on the ultrasound scans that flicker and vanish when observed too closely. They call it artifacting, interference. I know better. The child moves inside her differently, almost deliberately, like it's aware. But Molly stays strong. She smiles through the pain, through the fear she never fully voices. She still believes we escaped, or maybe she simply needs to believe that. I envy her for that. But I feel it growing, just as I feel it waiting. The thing beneath Elder Hollow was only one piece of something older, something larger, a fracture in the surface, a doorway. My father delayed it for decades. I delayed it again, but delay was never enough. I understand now. It was never about one house, never about that single ritual. The Order thought they could bind it to rules, to numbers, to bloodlines. But the thing never cared for rules. It only cares for hunger, and hunger always finds a way. 2 nights ago, I woke up at 3:33 a.m. The clock blinked red against the darkness of our room. Molly slept beside me, her breath slow and shallow. The city outside was still alive. Sirens, distant cars, neon light reflecting against the windows. But inside, the air had grown cold. The armchair sat in the corner. The same armchair, identical. It hadn't been there when we moved in. I stared at it for hours, not daring to blink, afraid that if I did, it might shift again, that the thing would move like it once had back in the house. But it didn't move. It only sat there, empty, waiting for me to leave it empty too long. The next morning it was gone, as though it had never existed, a warning or a reminder. I spoke with no one about it, not Molly, not the doctors, not the priests. No one could help, because this isn't something you cure. It's something you carry. The rules are no longer written on paper. They're etched into my bones. Never leave the chair empty. Always count the stairs. Never open the hatch. But none of it matters now. Molly went into labor early. Too early. The hospital filled with sterile lights, beeping monitors, nurses moving quickly with hushed voices. The doctors whispered in the hallway, exchanging confused glances over strange readings they couldn't interpret. I was kept outside for most of it, locked behind glass, watching, powerless. When they finally allowed me inside, I found Molly pale but breathing, her hand weak in mine. Her eyes flicked open, glassy, barely able to focus. The baby hadn't cried, not once. The doctor handed me our child, wrapped tightly in hospital linens, their face unreadable. The infant's eyes were open, wide, unblinking, black. Not brown, not blue, black. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, my heart a hammer inside my chest. The room dimmed around me. The voices returned, like distant echoes crawling back from that chamber beneath the house. The blood is complete. The baby's small fingers curled around mine. Cold, far too strong for something so small. Molly whispered my name. Stephen. I couldn't answer. I didn't know who or what I was holding. The nurses moved quickly again. Machines beeped. The room filled with their urgent murmurs, but it all faded into a distant hum. My world narrowed to the thing in my arms. The circle was complete. The child is ours, and not ours. I left the hospital room that night to breathe, to think, to scream, but no sound came out of me. I stood alone in the parking lot under flickering fluorescent lights, staring at nothing. That's when I heard it again, the faint creak of wood behind me. I turned. The armchair stood beside the wall of the hospital entrance, empty, waiting. I stared at it, feeling its pull, feeling the weight of the debt I had inherited from my father, the debt I had passed on. It will never stop. It will only wait. The hunger is patient. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this chilling story. Sometimes horror isn't about the monsters we see, but about the darkness that lingers long after the lights go out, the kind that whispers from hidden corners, that sits quietly in an empty chair, waiting. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying tales that will haunt your nights and stay with you long after the story ends. And remember, some rules are written for a reason. We'll see you in the next nightmare.